Well, Brian, I'm excited to have you here today. Thank you for being part of this new conversation series around artificial intelligence. And while we have talked often that it's not everything is new, there are certainly pieces of it that are going to matter greatly as we continue to move forward. And it's not only the technology evolution side of it, but how do businesses best deploy and use the tools and operating systems and operational practices to be able to get ultimate results. And this week our word is transformation. And as you know, I've chosen words that have the letters AI in them, and yet they, in fact, are not new. We have been talking about transformation in the mortgage industry for probably longer than we care to admit, right?
Absolutely true.
And in this particular case, one of the things that excites me the most about this evolution of artificial intelligence is that it feels like this is a true opportunity to move past some of those barriers for why things have not moved as rapidly as they may have in the past. Having said that, it comes with greater opportunity, can also create greater risk. So, having those guardrails around what that might look like and understanding that is a pivotal piece to ultimately achieving not only adoption, but return on investment.
Absolutely true, Brooke. Couldn't agree more across the board.
So I'm going to start our conversation today with just level setting. You know, I'm a big proponent of the language in and of itself. And in this case, the language of the definition of what is transformation. The definition of transformation is re-architecting how an organization operates, its technologies, its workflows, its governance, and its culture to deliver a sustainable competitive advantage. And that definition actually comes from Boston Consulting Group. And when I saw it, I couldn't have agreed more with how it coalesced with what it is we're going to speak about today. So, while I would say to you that how AI isn't a technology shift, it's a leadership, culture, and design shift. And I'm going to turn it over to you because while I don't necessarily think you need an introduction, I would like to give you the opportunity to share with our audience what is it that you're up to these days?
Thanks, Brooke. Happy to do that. So my name is Brian Stucky. I come from the technical side of the world, but I have been focused solely really in the mortgage industry for about 25 years now. I've worked with a lot of technologies in the past that at the time and before were considered AI and now are sort of in the wake of everything else that's going on. Specifically, I'm talking about rule-based systems, what used to be known as expert systems that are prevalent across the mortgage industry. That was one case where we had an opportunity and did transform a little bit about how the mortgage world was able to operate. Over the last 5 to 6 years, my focus has really shifted now into responsible AI and AI governance. I am a big believer and proponent of AI and all that it can possibly do. I'm fond of using the old Spider-Man adage from a cartoon: with great power comes great responsibility. And if we do not take care to instill the guardrails and the safety features around AI, there is potential for far more damage than any other kind of technology we have employed in financial services or any other domain for that example. And so I have found this to be a great area to work in that well, it's wonderful when you find an area to work in that you're passionate about, and I safe to say I am passionate about those particular topics.
Well, I can certainly attest to that in the multiple conversations we've had, and it's, all things AI, right? And I think that setting our tone for the conversation today, AI everywhere all at once. And while AI is not new, as you've just described, the letters I would suggest are probably the most commonly used in the alphabet today. And part of a leadership dynamic is identifying not only what have we had, but what in fact is new and how are those things shifting so that when we incorporate new tools or whether it's a build or buy situation, what are the things that we need to do differently in order to ultimately achieve the organizational objective. Part of that comes as well is that when we talk about governance and risk, I often say that, risk is a four-letter word, right? I have a whole session about how many four-letter words are related to artificial intelligence. Brings a whole new perspective.
Absolutely.
And yet in the same token that when we use the word risk, it's not all things are created equal. That one organization, when they do their review, may deem a particular product or a build as within their risk guardrails, where another organization may not. And I think it's important to identify a couple of things. Number one, that not all things, in fact, are created equal. It does take that individual organizational review because of the organization's infrastructure or follow-up systems or whatever the use case might be, that those risks are identified as use case specific. But in addition to that, that it's whether it's build or buy, there are different considerations that need to be taken into play. So with that, let's kind of level set and if you wouldn't mind giving us your definition of what artificial intelligence governance means, and then I'll cascade into the overarching responsible AI definition that I use, and that'll set the tone for the balance of our conversation.
For AI governance, typically I'm thinking about the how. How does an organization get these guardrails, get these reviews, get this analysis embedded as part of their software development lifecycle, as part of their compliance structure, as part of their audit structure to make them work, to make everything that I believe you'll probably speak to, Brooke, in terms of responsible AI in everything that we do. And so that's really the aspect that I focus on when I think about AI governance.
That's awesome. And, even still, it's the things that you'll speak to, well, they're not all new. They're elevated. And what I reference is leveling up with the lens of artificial intelligence as it's evolving. And how, in turn, does that cascade to the terminology responsible artificial intelligence? And most readily, what I see is that the default when RAI is the term is used, the default is to the algorithmic side, which 100% accurate and needs to be in play unequivocally.
Yes.
Having said that, it's so much broader than that. Therefore, the definition that I use is that's an approach to deploying AI systems that's aligned with an organization's missions, values, goals, and risk tolerances while still delivering a transformative business outcome. And the reason that I've aligned with that particular definition is that so many things in relationship to AI and the overarching governance needing to do things earlier and more often to and based on that setup, achieving a definitive different outcome.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. The algorithmic part of this is very, very critical. But the first question that one should ask, and this involves with getting involved in this life cycle early, is should we build this? Should we build it for the purpose in which we believe it's going to be intended? There are certainly things we can do with AI that by the letter of the law are legal, but is it the kind of thing you would want to go tell your next door neighbor that your company is doing? Would you really want to get that word out there? Is that really the place where you want to take it? And I think this has been a difficult thing for companies to deal with because I've lost count at this point of how many different organizations I've spoken to. And what I hear is, well, our top level leadership is saying AI, AI, AI all the time, and they're throwing it out to go do it. And they haven't really considered a lot of the strategy or the governance that needs to be in place to do it well. And I think that's one reason why the mortgage industry and probably a few others, I would call adoption broad but shallow. They just haven't gotten terribly far yet. And part of that is because they haven't taken the opportunity to really transform what they do. They're getting nickels and dimes and pieces to make something a little bit more efficient or a little bit cooler, but not really attacking the bigger problems.
And that's exactly where that paradigm needs to shift. You set me up perfectly for our next section, which is new risks require new leadership thinking, right? That this is a leadership challenge. It's not necessarily a technology piece. And what is it that leaders can do differently? And for example, I'm going to give a few talking points and you can pick which is most important to you to touch on today. So why is what's happening today different than traditional software risks? And we have all kinds of new vocabulary, confabulation versus hallucination. And it always makes me smile when I hear the word hallucination. And the first definition is that when an AI system provides an answer that, while seemingly accurate, is utterly false. And it makes me smile. I'm like, okay, well, wait a minute. Do we know humans that might talk that way? And not in a negative way, but just in setting our expectations for what is it that what do we expect of this system versus what is the reality of humans, and how might humans continue to be a pivotal part of the equation as we move forward. Other considerations on the risk side are privacy leakage, drift, and the emerging autonomy that coming into 2025, the expected most popular phrase was going to be agentic AI. And if you look at the recent reporting, it is absolutely true that has been one of the most popular phrases of 2025. And last but not least, and I think we've talked about this before, but we'll invite you back for a separate conversation on the whole premise of third-party service providers and what is the same or different in relationship to the third-party side of things. So you get to pick.
Well, first, I think we could spend an entire session on the last item you mentioned on third-party and vendor tools. I will say for now, tear up your contracts you have at companies for dealing with vendors right now, because those need to be rethought and reworded, period. So we'll leave it at that and carry on for a later discussion. But the first point you mentioned, why is this new and why is it a little bit different? And I'm gonna, come from a technology side first, since that's my background. And for the purposes of this discussion, I am going to include machine learning in the topic, or in the bucket of AI. I know it's kind of, people are viewing it as sort of the redheaded stepchild right now. Well, that's not really AI. We won't have that discussion here. But some of the risks that come with it are very similar to what you have in generative AI. The data has to be good, and you've got to take great caution with what you use and how you use it.
Data,
And they're
another
both black
four-letter
boxes.
word with AI, right?
Absolutely, but they're both black boxes. All right, explainability is a key, and that's something we didn't really have to worry so much about before. I alluded to rule-based systems and business rule management systems. Those leave you an audit trail that is crystal clear. You know why something happened, where it happened, and when it happened. You get called in for an audit, you can produce all of that. It's a trickier situation with machine learning model or with generative AI. How, I threw this data at it and this came out. How and why? Not too sure. All right, we got to
Well,
take a closer
and
look at it. So
part of that
that's the
is
kind of
true.
thing where you start to vary from what we've been doing, and the kind of thing that AI starts to throw at you now that you have to think about.
And based on what it is you've just shared, I would capsulize that in the conversations I have with people is the realization of what are each of those methodologies and potentially how they are they are nested within each other, or they in fact are a standalone. And one isn't necessarily lesser than another, but it's a matter of choosing the appropriate methodology and the level of risk that an organization is willing to undertake based on their infrastructure, as we've noted, to be able to choose what methodology is best for each individual use case.
Yeah, yeah. Please don't get in the habit of, all right, well, we're going to solve everything with AI. Or
Right.
we're going to solve everything with generative AI, because that's not the right answer. And I'm sorry, but some of the basic technologies are well suited for certain types of problem. You don't need to necessarily throw a generative AI model at it and think it will be better. In
And
fact,
that should actually
in,
give our friends in the industry solace, right? Because not like everything doesn't have to change, but we do have to level up to understand there are certain pieces of new technology that can absolutely expedite or elevate what has been done today.
yeah, the power is in using these things in complementary ways. What goes well with which? Earlier on, we saw some great examples with decision modeling, decision management systems, and being able to tie into predictive analytics as part of it. It makes each of those a little bit more powerful. And now you can think about generative AI on top of that. And some pretty powerful systems are possible if you allow yourself to rethink in that fashion and not try to, what's the adage? When you've only got a hammer, everything tends to look like a nail. And we've got a lot of different tools to use. And frankly, it's a lot easier to have a screwdriver, a hammer, and a saw than just a hammer if you're going to build a house.
And to your point, we need all of those tools to build a house, right? You just have to pick the right tool for whatever happens to be the task of the day. So let's shift into that. And our final section before our fun stuff is governance and regulation as value drivers, and talking about how the lack of a federal definition of artificial intelligence and the possibility of that creating uncertainty, cost, and operational burdens as individual states have become very active in the absence of the federal side of things. That having consistent guardrails, you and I are each believers in that having those guardrails create stability and speed, not necessarily constraint. In the same token, I think we would both suggest, be careful what you wish for, right? Because without the appropriate parties, even those of us who would be downstream as compared to the extraordinarily large technology companies, right? Of course they need to have a say, but let's look at the downstream impacts in MBA and CHLA, MISMO. You've done work with MISMO for a long, long time, and how active the variance of things, how those pieces are going to play together as we move forward. And that early governance and a shift left, as people have begun to say, accelerates value.
This has been, I think, an interesting question because I've had it posed to me like, well, is the regulatory uncertainty really slowing people down a lot? And if it is, it's more, I think, in the form of a low speed bump as opposed to a brick wall and some things that are there and you've got to take caution, but not over the top to date. What has been difficult, as you alluded to, was a lot of variance in, one administration in the White House from the next. Some things are thrown out, they're undone. Some other things come out. In the absence of some stability there, many states have taken upon themselves, first with data privacy, then with some bills regulating AI, or in some cases, specific AI applications like in hiring software. But it is a mishmash, and that is a bit of an issue. There had been an effort earlier this year from the government to ban, or I guess put a 10-year moratorium on state regulation of AI, which I
Pulled out
frankly
of the
thought
one
would have
big
been a
beautiful bill.
disastrous move. Yeah.
Yeah,
And that
10
was
years,
pulled out.
10 years in the
10
context of
years.
AI is lifetimes. And interestingly enough, that's part of the key to this is we are not accustomed to thinking in the context of the speed with which things are happening on the technology front today, right? We, as business leaders, have been often schooled in negotiating longer term contracts because pricing will be better with a longer term relationship kind of aspect. And that's one of the pieces that we want to consider differently with the evolving technologies. If you're choosing a
Yeah.
solution that's evolving, that you don't necessarily want a long-term contract because in fact there could be something different that you want to be able to plug and play in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I really am not sure I can imagine where I think AI will realistically be in 2035. If you'd asked me in 2015, I would have been really wrong, as would many of people. So that just terrified me at that particular thought. Now, that initial effort was pulled out and now it's apparently being resurrected again. There's probably various reasons for that we won't go into here, but I again hope it's something that doesn't happen because even though fragmented, there's been a lot of good that has come from the state efforts in learning what is going to be critically important in terms of regulation. But even worldwide, it's fragmented. And any company that works internationally, and I've been speaking to some law firms that are in DC and New York, for their clients and themselves, in the US, there is, or maybe is or is not, a federal level of regulation, particular state level regulation. Then as they go abroad, the EU AI Act, the act that's out of Singapore, out of the UAE, India, Australia, and each of those is potentially impacting them and their clients in different ways. So it's really a grab bag out there right now. That does make things a little tricky, which to me just means, and you brought up MISMO, with MISMO and the NBA, my opinion here, it's incumbent upon them to say, we're going to regulate ourselves and take this up and do enough that we think is going to handle whatever you may throw out in some kind of a form. I just think it makes sense that way.
I think it's that combination, and it's something that we need to get better at in that collaboration. We were talking about the regulatory side of things, and I think that it's one of the things that bears noting in that number one, we already have a large regulatory responsibility. And just because we add the letters AI, it doesn't diminish any of our existing responsibilities. So, a simple place to start is that if here is my system for a given operation today, and now I'm adding a new component of technology, how does that change the framework that I have to address the current regulatory structure today? I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be more complicated than that. And yet, in the same token, the other side of it comes into play in that given the magnitude of change that's what is a focus in a given government agency and how those shifts are playing themselves out, organizations making conscious decisions of the reality that those shifts may shift, those winds may shift back, right? And what level of risk is an organization willing to take? And once again, I think that that becomes individual choice based on the systems and the infrastructure and all of the rest of it, the products that are being provided, and many of the other variables that quite frankly aren't new. And how then do we move forward with that? It's having those people at the table. It's having people such as yourself from recognizing and understanding the deep technological side of things, as well as who's the ultimate user and who is being impacted. Right. And we still have this, well, there's this urgency to incorporate new technology. Many organizations serve populations that are not utilizing technology in the way that the headlines would identify. So, how does an organization parallel and serve the communities that they serve, whether they be technologically advanced or advancing, or if I refer to it as the old fashioned way, they actually want to be able to pick up a phone and actually speak to someone, right? And what do we do
Yeah,
with that?
that's always going to be an interesting issue for anything that is client, if you will, facing. And I'm just always trying to figure out where that age gap is, where there is a certain age I think you hit of individuals that did not grow up with a lot of tech that are of the ones that are complaining about having to reset the clock on their VCR the when the time changes happen, and that's going to be a slog, and there's going to be a lot of distrust for people that are used to walking into a brick and mortar building and talking to a real life person. And at some point we'll be over that. Everybody that is really the main consumers are going to have grown up with technology.
Yeah,
I know
100%.
personally getting to refi a house a few years ago, with the exception of the appraiser that came to visit, everything was done online, including the notary. For me, I thought it was wonderful. I mean, this was great. This was easy. This was fast. But I know the industry and I'm used to that. Would everybody have been as comfortable with it? Maybe not. But then there's opportunity for AI within that. Having very friendly chat assistants that are multilingual, that can tailor to whatever knowledge level one may have, say, of mortgage lending. Get them through to explain, here's what all of these costs mean to you. Here's when your loan payment may go up, and here's why. But having that extra level of communication. So I think we can use AI in those instances to make everything a little bit better for those that may be somewhat more reticent about it, and not just reduce AI to their experiences by talking to an airline a chatbot and saying agent, agent, agent over and over again to try to get to a real person.
Yeah.
And that, frankly, is the level of many consumers out there. And that's the most they've experienced. And I'm always surprised by that once I get outside of my bubble to see people have heard of ChatGPT. Have you really used it for stuff, planning a vacation or, any number of things? And a lot of them just really haven't. They know what they are, but they've never played with them. I
Wow.
never
And
tried
once
it.
again, you make me smile, Brian. Once again, you set me up for our close in that you bring us into a word that I refer to as lifescape. How AI is everywhere all at once. And that this is where, from a business perspective, we're so accustomed to thinking of things in our business silos and how are we going to address things in business. One of the things that makes AI or evolving AI so markedly different is that it literally is affecting our lifescape. whether we recognize it or not. And so, on that note, we like to close with something fun. Talk to us about a tool or a tip or something that you found interesting that you can utilize AI in a lifescape kind of way.
I mean, there are so many, to me, great examples there. I think one that I may have mentioned to you in a previous discussion, I needed to get a new laptop. And what before would have been a lot of pouring through specs and dealing with it, I gave a lot of the things I said, here's what I want to a generative AI model. Here's what I'm seeking, and start to narrow down my choices. Then give me the pros and cons of these, and which ones of these are louder if their fans have to come on. The size, how heavy are these? And how well built if I want to make it very portable. And I got a beautiful grid of this stuff thrown out in a fairly short amount of time. It made life a little bit easier that way. Did a lot to help plan aspects of European vacation earlier this summer.
That's
Frankly,
fun. I used it that way too.
yeah,
Although it did give me the wrong fairy times, just for the record. So it is absolutely helpful, but trust then verify, right? I mean, the same rules apply.
you do need to do that. Yes, you can get things back. And I love using this example with it. One of the things I have used it for over the years, I'm a big fan of college basketball. I go with friends to Vegas for March Madness every year. I'd start to put together ways to say, gosh, can I build something to help me place some bets? And over the years, what I started with turned into predictive analytics. And this past year, it got tied into generative AI with it. But when I remember first asking, I forget which LLM it was, and I said, well, so what are the most important characteristics that are going to determine the winner of a basketball game? The first 9 it gave me were all reasonable. Number 10 was weather, which I found interesting since college basketball is typically always played inside. And while there have been extreme examples of a very, very, very warm building where the floor got slippery from sweat, weather just doesn't really usually impact it in any discernible way. So I started to wonder, how did it get to that? College football, yes. College basketball, not so much. So you see those things still happening. And every once in a while, I'll see answers that I know are wrong. And then I wonder about how about the places where I don't know if it's wrong and I'm taking it at its word. And you see where some of the risk can come about.
And that's a perfect segue into the transformation in the topic as a whole, that good guardrails don't restrict progress, they unlock it. And having that point of reference for what's truth and what might be hallucination or just, pure bad information, that's how we operate within a given use case will make a difference as we continue to move forward. And I want to thank you for your time and being with me this
Pleasure, as always.
afternoon, and appreciate you, and look forward to future talks. We could go all afternoon.
We can, and we have. So yes, absolutely. I'll look forward to it as well.
Well, thank you.